We are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome again to another episode of the Who's Who in Bitcoin Innovation 2023. I'm Albert, CEO of Bitcoin Startup Lab. Welcome to the Who's Who and a founder's journey into the Bitcoin interview series. The Bitcoin community has come together to celebrate innovative and significant achievements on Bitcoin so that we can reinforce and grow the innovation culture on Bitcoin. Significant achievements on Bitcoin are things that were done for the first time ever. We're setting new records to push forward the innovation frontier of Bitcoin. So this year, we've invited 30 top innovators. I'm about to introduce you to our guest very soon. But first, this show is brought to you by the Bitcoin Startup Lab. We are a pre-accelerator in the Bitcoin ecosystem, helping founders turn their ideas into investment-worthy startups on Bitcoin. And a big shout out to our media partner, CryptoSlate, a crypto-agnostic media platform that brings the latest happenings on Bitcoin to the rest of the crypto world. And a big thank you, of course, to all the teams and all the guest speakers that come together to make this show possible and accelerate the advent of the Bitcoin economy. So it is our hope that by the guests coming up and sharing their founder stories, it inspires more builders to come to Bitcoin so we can build a sustainable Bitcoin economy together. And today our special guest is Rob Hamilton, CEO of AnchorWatch, and they are the first to launch an insurance product on Bitcoin L1, which is super exciting. But before we get into that, let's invite Rob up to stage. Hi, Rob. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me, Albert.
Yeah, super. So let's take it from the top, just for the audience, so the audience knows how we're going to run today's talk. So the first part, Rob is going to share his origin story. Right? I mean, this is a really great segment into what Rob was doing before he became a founder. And we found that this was, very powerful because people resonate with certain things in the founder origin story. And this will motivate people to come build on Bitcoin. The second part, of course, is how Rob got into Bitcoin, right? And the third, of course, the main topic is how AnchorWatch became the first insurance on Bitcoin L1 and what does that unlock? In addition to just the AnchorWatch features, right? And then finally, at the end, if anything piques your interest, any kind of question, we're going to open up the floor to Q&A at the end. So thanks for joining, everyone. And everyone who's here, I see a lot of familiar faces. You guys could go ahead and do us a solid and go ahead and share this in your retweet this Twitter space. Thank you. All right, so let's get into it, Rob. Before this is a question more about even before university, when you're a teenager, did you do any side hustles? Like, did you hack away at innovate things or have side businesses? Can you share any of those? What was the first memory you have about that?
Yeah, so when it comes to side hustles, I mean, the day I turned 14, I could get working papers. I started bussing tables at my favorite restaurant in my local town out on the east end of Long Island, and around that same time. This is, early mid 2000s, internet culture really starting to take an uptick where, now you had access to computers at school, getting a computer in the home, and starting to get my first foray into online communities. So around this time, I was always loved video games growing up. I used to play a lot, used to also be really competitive when it came to playing video games. And around that time, esports was a really nascent idea. And I started following along an online community that did competitive video games for Xbox, like for Halo, and that was called Major League Gaming. And that was kind of really my first foray into online communities, as well as, I guess, what I would say, businesses, right? So I started participating in their online forums. I started getting to know members of the community and the people at the company. And I actually got a job helping moderate and kind of manage their online community. And around this time, it was something I did initially, just because out of fun and passion, and it turned into an income stream because I quickly was actually brought on to be a referee. So I actually traveled around the country all throughout my early teen years, officiating and refereeing competitive esports, right? Which was kind of a fun dream job. Yeah. Yeah. So nice. I still have all my referee jerseys. So Halo, Rainbow Six Vegas, Gears of War, Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Dota, League of Legends, all these games. It was like 6 times a year I would fly out for a long weekend and do a lot of work. And it was interesting because it was also a startup in its own right? So seeing how something that was a really small idea when I first started getting involved to seeing it grow over time was a really interesting insight into seeing another way of working, not having to work at a big company. And it was very interesting seeing that development. And that's kind of like a lot of my major forays and interactions and learning how to interact with online communities and basically online businesses built around online communities. It was very interesting to kind of see that development.
Yeah, and so you're almost like a native to this because community building is like one of those things like pillars of Web3, but you lived and breathed it as a teenager. And
yeah.
Like if you're traveling around, like a lot of these communities were coming from zero to becoming full blown, right? So watch that entire cycle.
Yeah, watching something become really niche and weird to something that you go from telling people about it and no one even knows it's real or like does it even exist, and having it become a cultural mainstay, like the idea of esports. Like seeing that whole transformation over 15 years was definitely very interesting. It was one of these things that I had conviction in the sense of, people are going to be playing video games. It's a very large media market. People are, man will still be competitive, just like as a base primitive, everyone wants to win, right? And the idea that people are going to be competitive with video games just made perfect sense to me because I was already living it. And then seeing that kind of grow and develop, it just kind of validated a thesis of, this idea of how humans would interact with online games. And it was really interesting for me was always seeing you would have a game release, and what was always fascinating to me was how humans interact with these systems and seeing how game theory evolves and what's called like a meta game. And that's like where all the strategy and kind of like the iterations and a lot of the skill comes from, is understanding and anticipating on the other person's action, right? And that's just like a really fascinating thing that got me, really got my brain grinding along, thinking about how complex systems and how everyone interacts with them and seeing kind of where pressure points and breaks are. And that's definitely, a lot of what interests me when I eventually got into Bitcoin.
Okay, so yeah, that we're leading up to this. So how many years were you doing this for? Like you said busting tables 14 and 15 you started doing this, right? And then how
I worked in some capacity at Major League Gaming starting off in 2005, and then this was all the way through 2007, 2000, end of 2016, early 2017. So yeah, and I ended up actually getting a job out of college directly working for them, managing their ad server. So this was actually my first big like professional career occupation, was working in what's called ad technology. Not even onboarding. So basically, the moment
people buying the ads
themselves. Okay. Yeah. So we would we have a website that has, display ads. You'd have a live stream that you'd go to commercial break and we'd be injecting ads in real time into the video player. And this was really fascinating from a business operations standpoint to go from the entire pre-sales process of helping someone try and land a sales deal to being able to, once you get that handshake and contract, executing and making sure you're delivering the right amount of ads that you were promising, right? And then at the end, once the ad campaign runs, running all the analytics and the reporting on the back end to kind of show a proof and like your results and your KPIs and whatnot. So that was really, really fascinating seeing the full business cycle, and it was a very key revenue driver for the company. So being hands-on and actually like in the ad server itself and configuring, saying this is going to run from September 1st to December 31st, and it's going to run this many ads. And then it's inventory management, making sure you haven't oversold the ad space, or if there's not enough ad space sold, how do you optimize additional revenue, right? Like this is where programmatic advertising and real-time bidding start coming in. That's kind of where I got a lot of my launch point for my career working in ad tech, was understanding that if you, let's say, have 1 million ads that you serve a month and you only sold 400,000 of them, you have money sitting on the table and you're trying to make as much money as possible from those remaining 600,000 ads, and doing all of the analytics work and the revenue operations reporting and kind of trying to find a way to maximize revenue was it really engaged me, because I got my degree I got a double major in math and economics, and it was very fun taking it into an application layer as opposed to a theoretical idea.
Well, I had the same double major.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so let me ask you. I'm curious. Like, who are buying these ads? This is a little tangent, but I'm just curious.
Sure. So you would have brands that were part of the industry, right? So you'd have video game publishers, electronics peripherals, right? Anyone that was looking to get that 15 to 35-year-old male market that was very heavily dominated of our audience. And then you would get endemic brands as well. Like you would get like Old Spice deodorant or Doritos or Dr. Pepper, right? You would get very large brands that were looking to get exposure to that audience. And then on sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm just saying that.
And so those are like the large, big sponsorship brand deals, right? Where they're buying media and they're also getting maybe live activation as well, which was a unique thing that we did, was that we weren't just an online website. We had, 6+ live events every year. So you would actually get on the ground, like live physical event space and like sponsor booths and whatnot. And that was all kind of bundled up in the online advertising piece. And then once you have like those large dollars spoken for, you have anything else that hasn't been sold yet. And that's where it goes into like programmatic advertising. And that's usually much more catered to you specifically, where you go and you visit the ad, there's maybe the media brand has some baseline understanding of who you are as a person. Maybe they saw that you were looking to maybe buy a mattress previously, and then they would serve you mattress ads in real time because they knew you as a customer were already in the market looking for mattresses. So they're going to try and spend extra money to try and chase you down, right? So that was kind of like the long tail distribution of everything that wasn't sold by major sponsorship ads. You'd get individualized custom ads for specifically you. And that's programmatic advertising.
Super. No, I can see where you're getting your business sense from, like years and years in this community building. Really, thanks for sharing that. And I think what a lot of people are wondering is, like at the end of you had mentioned how you got into Bitcoin. Like, where in this process did Bitcoin come out?
So Bitcoin for me was at the end of 2013. I had a friend who'd been talking about it for me for maybe 2 to 3 months because he knew I was a libertarian, like sound money guy. He was like, you should check out this. I kind of dismissed it, just kind of busy. And then a bunch of my buddies actually started mining Dogecoin as a joke. And I was like, oh, I have a graphics card. Let me start mining Dogecoin. And then I started playing around with the software and realizing that like this wasn't just like that there was actually like a technology platform underneath this, right? And I actually went then to want to learn more. So I went to the New York City Bitcoin developer meetup. I think it was like meetup number 10. They just had meetup 200, to be clear. So this was very early on in like the New York City bit dev scene. And going to those meetings was really humbling and eye-opening for me, seeing a lot of very smart people working on a very hard problem. And those bit devs meetings, they threw you in the deep end. They would pull up GitHub requests and start reviewing C++ code. So it was actually the inspiration for me wanting to learn how to actually program. I wasn't a programmer up to this point. I was something that I would say competent, being able to maybe edit a couple files here and there. And I was good at IT general troubleshooting of computers, but actual like writing my own custom functions wasn't really quite there. So that's what really kicked off a lot of my desire to learn how to program. And then I started taking that passion to learn how to program, and I started automating a lot of my daily tasks that I was doing in Excel spreadsheets and, doing dashboard reports and whatnot. So that was a really big unlock for me personally in my career before I got into Bitcoin, was using code and writing my own code and using technology to kind of accelerate my own productivity and efficiencies. And that all really came from Bitcoin, back to and just being surrounded by elite level developers and cryptographers. Bit devs, New York City bit devs. Shout out to Jay, who's still running it. It's a fantastic platform, and that's just as an open call to anyone that's thinking about building in Bitcoin. Go to a local bit devs if you have one. If not, maybe try and start one. Going to those is a really great way to start seeing how engineers that are building in Bitcoin are interfacing with the network, and kind of, finding interesting ways to kind of build on Bitcoin is like going right to the source and drink from the fire hose.
Oh, yeah, that's great advice. Is there one in Orange County? Yeah, I know there's one in LA. There's one in Orange County.
I think Brian Harrington, a buddy of mine, runs Orange County Bit Devs. I haven't been out too much to be able to check it out personally, but I know Brian puts on a good show.
Yeah. I know Brian. Okay, excellent, super. Okay, yeah, no. So that's a shout out to Bit Devs, guys, for all of you guys on the fence here. Thinking about coming into Bitcoin. That's a really great piece of advice. Go to your local Bit Devs, and if there's none, start one, right? Because it's an open community. I think it's like the largest Bitcoin developer community in the world now, right?
Bit devs, and like all the different branches of it. I think the New York City Bit Devs is still the largest one, but there's also the Austin Bit Devs, which has a really great show too that I've been to, and also Nashville at Bitcoin Park has a really strong up and coming one as well. Nice. So just where most major cities at this point definitely have a Bit Dev, so I would definitely encourage checking it out.
Awesome. Okay, so actually it was Dogecoin that got you into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Right?
It was my friends mining Dogecoin, ironically, that got me to start playing around with it. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, no, so that's like it does have like a good use case, Dogecoin gets people into Bitcoin. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's super. And then so and do you say this was like what'd you say 2013? What
Yeah.
was
End of 2013.
okay, all right. So wow, you this is like 10 years before. Okay, so
Yeah.
when did it finally like when did this passion or Bitcoin eventually evolve into like you like I'm sure you're like hacking together different stuff, right?
Yeah, well, that like I mentioned, Bitcoin kind of inspired me to learn how to program, right?
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
kept the things simple at first and kind of automating my own workflows, and then starting to think about other ways I could use programming as a skill set to start messing around with different problems. So recreationally, as a hobbyist, I also play poker, so starting to play around with like poker solvers and like kind of going through all the game theory and all of the simulations that they would run, all using a lot of code, start poking around and getting an understanding of how it all works under the hood. Also doing some very basic analytics and looking around like at sports betting. Just never something I took it like full stride seriously, but just trying to understand how you can use large data sets and being able to use that to try and incur an advantage. And the first thing you learn immediately, because I ended up later on becoming a data scientist, is that most problems are actually more of a data engineering and curation of the data set, and that's much more of the effort. It's not as sexy and glamorous, but it's definitely where you get the most returns on investment from time spent, as well as your the actual work that needs to be done.
Super. And can you sort of give us a high level, like the major milestones between you getting into Bitcoin at the New York BitDevs to you starting AnchorWatch? Like what were like sort of like what were like the
Yeah.
or like major milestones that led you to building on the first
So
app on Bitcoin L1?
yeah, so for me, it was the I guess a very high level milestones is getting into Bitcoin, starting to get really obsessive about how powerful this technology was. And this is back in 2013, 14, right? So like $200 a coin. Um, starting to tell everyone that they should adopt it. I was actually still working at Major League Gaming. I told them they should accept it for payments, right? And
What
it was
happened,
a
by the way? What happened there? I'm just curious. If you're at liberty to share, what was the
Oh, they
answer?
patiently listened and we had some conversations, but it was just too complicated to like integrate on the payment side. But I was definitely the person walking around the office handing out, $20, which today is $2,000, right? Like,
Oh,
here, check it out. Isn't it so cool? On my phone wallet to their phone wallet, just trying to evangelize it, getting people excited about it. So from there, I guess that was my first brush point with a very strong conviction in something that was a contrarian view, was believing that, like, I guess the first one may have been esports as an idea being successful, but then the next one was definitely having this touch point with Bitcoin and understanding that most of the world had not fully figured out the value proposition behind this yet. So I ended up getting a job at IBM working as a consultant, leaning on a lot of my ad tech experience. I did that for a year and I was really hungering to do more actual full-time programming. So I actually did Bloom Tech, which formerly known as Lambda School, as a data science boot camp for 9 months. And I did that as a full-time focus to really give myself the environment to take a full swing and teaching myself and understand like how to like be a more proper of a programmer as opposed to strictly self-taught. Use that as really as a launching point for kind of starting to hack around on my own things. I started using libraries to start looking at the Bitcoin blockchain to be able to start parsing through transactions, right? Starting to run analytics on stuff, trying to take my passion for like data math analytics and combining it with Bitcoin. I got hired back at IBM as a data scientist, and I worked on that. When I went back there, I was doing advanced like analytics models using large like data sets around weather and shopping data to understand that like what kind of weather based on season and zip codes for stores that you would actually have changes in consumer behavior, and then using that as a data layer to actually sell to advertisers. So instead of indiscriminately maybe buying ad space across the internet, they could buy where they know where the weather was most predictive of someone making a purchase. So having that as a way to like nudge consumer behavior, where like if the pollen count and like your has spiked, selling something like a antihistamine to try and like help with your allergies. So that became really interesting too, in trying to solve core business problems of what large brands were looking for and using data as a way to differentiate and add value to consumers. So that would be like one big major data point. The pandemic happened right around the time of you know uh, when I went back to IBM. I worked there for a little over a year, And I was at a place where I had not seen my kids, even though I was working full-time remote. I had not seen my kid for a really, like, to actually have quality bonding time, and it was just too destructive for me to be able to like fully focus on it. So I made a decision to take a step back, and very quickly the opportunity kind of presented itself for me wanting to work in Bitcoin. So I started putting a lot of thought and effort into thinking about where would I work in Bitcoin. And around this time, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the app Clubhouse. That's where during the pandemic, this whole time working at IBM, I was spending a lot of time on Clubhouse and doing a lot of Bitcoin education, because I had been in Bitcoin since 2013, but I was very much more a quiet, sit in the back of the room observer as opposed to an active participant in discussions. And it was a really great opportunity to have scale where you would have rooms with 500-600 people, and being able to break down Bitcoin security. If you're going to do self-custody, this is the right way of doing it. As an education enablement for Bitcoin. And that's where I started to get to meet a lot of, regular, people that, you would maybe call them Bitcoin influencers, or just people that had a career in Bitcoin. And I guess I started in that sense organically, started raising my profile. People started, knew who I was, whereas before I was around Bitcoin, but I wasn't actively in discussions. And I was kind of very quick. I spent a couple months off to spend time with my kid, and then very quickly got the itch to want to start working again. So started thinking about what I wanted to work in Bitcoin, started applying for some Bitcoin jobs, got some offers, and very quickly an opportunity arose where the idea of building a company in Bitcoin would be most interesting. I guess shout out to American Hodl, who is well known in the Bitcoin Twitter sphere. He was my first investor, and he really, he told me, he was like, Rob, like, you're a smart guy, you think about things differently, like you should start a company. Like you shouldn't just like get a paycheck and like get a job somewhere. Like, you could be working on hard problems. And my response was, well, definitely interesting. I've never been a founder before, but trying to understand what that problem would be. And after some discussions, this idea of insurance for layer one Bitcoin came up. And that's where kind of the conversation started around AnchorWatch.
Okay, so American Huddle help plant the seed in your mind.
Absolutely.
What year was this?
This was February of 2022. So February last year.
Oh, wow. So
yeah.
Is American Huddle their X or Twitter handle?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's American Hodl 8. He's famous for talking smack and getting banned from Twitter. So he's always rotating. Yeah. American Hodl 8. American.
Is this his 8th iteration of getting banned?
It's definitely more than 8, but he just posts random numbers at the end. Yeah. So having a conversation with him, he was this real like jump off point though, was, Rob, believe in yourself, take a hard crack, try and solve a hard problem. And, he was the one who planted the seed. He was also our first money in as an investor back when we were starting this whole thing. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So what click? I'm sure that wasn't the first time someone asked you to, or suggested that you should be a founder, or was it?
Yeah, I definitely, people have said that before to me, but
what clicked this time?
Well, what clicked this time was, I would say, a little bit of a contrarian position being held in Bitcoin. Like the idea for insurance in Bitcoin is contrarian. And I think it comes from.
Can you share with the audience what that means at the time? Like, what do you?
Yeah. So like as a contrarian, I held a belief that many other people, I would maybe even argue to say most people in Bitcoin, did not believe in. And that was the idea that insurance as a marketplace will exist in Bitcoin. And that's a really good signal if you're trying to think about something you're building. Is it could be a important signal in understanding, or do you see the world differently in such a way that the market hasn't fully adjusted to your mental model, and then you can have an opportunity to build what other people aren't doing yet, right? And to kind of lay out the territory, most Bitcoin solutions up to this point are in a really like sticky place where either you go the traditional finance route of you just find someone to be a custodian, you give them all of the keys and you hope for the best, or you have to roll your own, private keys and your seed phrases and do a single sig or a multi-sig, get a hardware wallet. And it's a very high level barrier to entry. And this idea of insurance for Bitcoin kind of goes against a lot of people's gut instincts and thinking that, everyone's going to be self-custodying all of their Bitcoin. You can't do that the way Bitcoin scales, right? Not everyone can hold a single UTXO. Maybe there's some promise coming down the line with covenants to do coin pools and shared UTXOs. But as this technology exists today, you can't, share your, the barrier to entry for people to self-custody can be high, especially if you're a company or a business, because you have fiduciary obligations. You probably have legal requirements where, for example, Michael Saylor is not holding all of his Bitcoin in a Trezor under his desk, right? Like you need to have fiduciary firewalls and distribution of risks and responsibilities, where most of the design space of Bitcoin as it exists today is optimized for its original use case. And I still think is served very well is a sovereign individual, right? And I think a perfect example of this is how like a multi-sig is set up, where it's democracy for my money. It's 2 of 3, 3 of 5. If you can get majority vote of your keys, you can spend the money, which is perfectly fine as an individual. It gets complicated though when you're talking about companies and businesses that don't want to maybe have a key man risk where you have one or two bad actors and they can run off with all the company's money. Right. And insurance is not sexy. It's not cool. People don't view it as a cypherpunk fun thing. But I view it as just kind of foundational financial operations and financial services that exist for any other asset, right? Like, and a perfect example is that the GLD ETF, right? The gold ETF, the ETF itself is not insured because, the way the kind of like securities work in general, there's a centralized ledger of who's holding the shares. But the actual gold in that ETF is insured at a custodian. So it's using a custodian and it's insured, whereas everyone today just uses a custodian and it's little to no insurance. The idea of insurance for your Bitcoin itself was something that I would say 18 months ago when we started, there really wasn't much thought or attention put to. But to me, it's so obvious that as Bitcoin continues to mature and succeed, there will be an insurance market. The idea that you just give all of your keys to someone else, you pay them a SaaS management fee, cross your fingers and hope for the best, isn't really sustainable. So this is something, it's tough work in that, it's not something that you can just kind of spin up on a website over a weekend, right? In that sense, it can't be quite as much of a lean startup where you can just kind of like put out some code and like have it run and collect like a fee, because you need to have reinsurance and you need to have regulatory approvals and you need to kind of go through a lot of compliance hoops. And that's all done at the end of the day, for the consumer protection, so that I just can't be like, welcome to Rob's insurance company, buy in a policy for me. And then if something goes wrong, I disappear. Right. So this stuff is all very well tracked and managed to make sure that for the end consumer, when you're buying insurance coverage, you're actually getting what you're being promised.
Yeah, no, that last part is really insightful, and I hope a lot of people. I don't know how many people caught on onto it, but let me unpack it a little bit and have a dialogue with you about it. And we were talking about creating like more high level insurance, but then as you're trying to build this high level insurance, you guys found out that there's infrastructure that was missing that you guys had to build first, right? Yeah. And I think that's a classic indicator that you are in a blue ocean, right? When the more evolved, or the more end user facing products, you can't even build it before you build a foundation or the enabling thing. And that's the amazing thing about what you guys are doing with Anchor Watch. And also to show that, how early the market is. Like, yes, we're, over 10 years into Bitcoin, but in my opinion, now is the perfect time to get in if you're a builder, right? And but what do you think about that statement? Like,
well, I would agree. I think so. There's kind of like two arms of like our company. I've been largely talking about just like the idea of like insurance, the insurance operations of the business. But to emphasize your point about, there's no better time than now, is actually the tech side, our product called Trident Vault. And specifically, what's so interesting about this, about why this is a great time to build, is we're leveraging Miniscript, which allows for more advanced Bitcoin native smart contracts. And the real kind of story here is that there were very few people prior to us building on it that were even thinking or touching it. And this is to say that I said this on a podcast recently, was the idea that don't just assume someone else is building it. You need to go out and start working on it. So very quickly at a high level. Back in 2019, the Blockstream research team were trying to find ways of writing more analyzable and kind of secure Bitcoin scripts. And there's a whole reason I can get into like why that's complicated. But just to say, it was built. They were using it internally for some of their tools, and then no one else was really touching it. And what's really fascinating is in November of last year, we had a bit of a pivot going from retail customers to focusing on commercial entities. And this idea of using Miniscript as an enabler for that came up. And a lot of the initial feedback I got from people within the industry was, well, that doesn't does it even work? Like, why are you the first ones to work on it? And it goes to say that, talking about the blue ocean and the opportunity, there really was no one using it prior to us. And it was just sitting there. And I think I'm very happy. One of the things I'm most proud of so far with AnchorWatch is getting this increased awareness and adoption of using Miniscript as a technology. And this is all to say that now is a great time because builders are coming in and they're just starting to realize like what's the opportunity and design space for building Bitcoin Bitcoin solutions. And I believe over the next, call it 2 to 5 years, there's going to be a whole Cambrian explosion of a bunch of different people using this very generalized technology for their own use cases. We're using it for insurance, but that Miniscript is a much more wider generalized tool set to enable anyone who's building in Bitcoin to have more advanced layer 1 smart contracts, which allows people to build their own products and services that can be built natively on top of Bitcoin.
All right. So I got all that. The really exciting part is like more advanced layer 1 smart contracts. That is amazing. Yeah. Which means like guys, like the programmability of Bitcoin is here. And as Rob mentioned, the timing is now. I mean, I think 5 years is generous. I would probably err towards like 2 years, because if Ethereum took 6 years to get to where it is now, I think it might. I mean, maybe this is like too optimistic, but it's not inconceivable it would take like half the time for Bitcoin.
So yeah, I'm deliberate in 2 to 5 years because I think in 2 years it will be a standard toolkit that people use as like power users, and then it'll take another 3 years for the wider adoption. And I modeled this largely on the idea of multi-sig when it was first kind of it was always available in Bitcoin, but it's got somewhat standardized with pay to script hash. And it was live and it was ready to go, and then people didn't use it, and then it started becoming a power user thing. And now today we have so many different vendors and providers that can offer multi-sig, whether they're self-custodied wallets like Sparrow or Spectre, or if you're or Electrum, or if you're using a service like Akasa or Unchained Capital, right? Like it took time to kind of iterate and build on top of these things, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. Like I definitely think it can happen faster, but for wide market penetration proliferation, that's where I kind of put that timeline on. But I think we're going to be launching Trident Vault by the end of this year on mainnet, so we're going to be live and cooking. I know there's a project called Artica. I see heavily on Clown in the audience. He's been building on Miniscript as well. There's the Wizard Sardine guys who've already been live for some time building Liana wallet. There's a new company called Safe Vaults that are leveraging Miniscript. So like over the past 6 months, you've seen a whole pop of a bunch of people using this. And I think this is like the first step in that like exponential curve step function, because it was 0, and then it was like maybe 1 with Liana, and now it's like 6, and then probably in another year it's going to be 25, and then it's just going to keep on ticking up. And I think that's really exciting.
It is exciting. It is exciting. And it also underscores a point like, hey, if you guys are thinking about where to build your next project, come to Bitcoin. The timing is right now. I mean, this is a position.
Yeah.
And speaking of blue oceans, and because your co-founder Becca was we did an interview just about an hour ago here.
Sure.
Maybe before we get into that segment, maybe you can sort of catch everyone up to speed. Like, what's the first feature AnchorWatch is going to unlock for the world?
Yeah. So our primary focus.
How's that work? Yeah.
Yeah, so our first focus is on cold storage insurance, and this is because today a lot of companies have fiduciary responsibilities and kind of governance rules. They can't self-custody, just like they can't keep a bunch of cash in their desk at the company. They can't just like hold a ledger or a Trezor or even a software wallet on their computer that's just holding the Bitcoin, right? That's not sufficient for.
That's like negligent.
Yeah, it is. Right.
We're talking about that kind of money.
Exactly, right. And so we're trying to step beyond kind of like this very, today it's a binary either you're self-custodying or you leave all of your keys at a custodian. And maybe in the middle right now, you have like a collaborative custodian, like a Casa or Chain, like I mentioned. But from a company standpoint, if they're going to take exposure risk and have Bitcoin on the balance sheet, they don't want to, they already are bought in and accept the price volatility. The idea of a key man risk, though, of someone, mismanaging key material and losing the money forever is something that, for a lot of people turns them off. I've actually met LPs in Bitcoin venture companies that don't personally hold Bitcoin because their fund mandates allow them to invest equity investments. But because the Bitcoin is uninsured, they actually can't get the Bitcoin exposure itself. Right. So bringing this to parity with any other asset where you can actually have this distribution of custody in a way where you could have insurance is a huge unlock for just traditional finance and incremental capital. Additionally, just on the unlocks, and just to take a step back from what we're specifically doing at Anchor Watch with the insurance, is the idea with Miniscript, you use the right phrase. It's making Bitcoin programmable money, right? So having more robust security features where you can have it say, I have a 2 of 3 multi-sig, but maybe if the money hasn't moved in a year, I want to make it a 1 of 3 multi-sig, right? And that instantly, gives you much more depth. And the idea being that you want to be able to mitigate many types of risk, which greatly complements insurance. But just for other use cases, I realize I didn't even explain Miniscript very briefly. It's a way to build more advanced layer 1 smart contracts that are human analyzable and understandable, right? As opposed to looking at maybe a big Bitcoin script, like they can be really hard to wrestle and interpret and understand unless you're an expert. But you're able to use 3 key tools. 1, signatures. We already use those in Bitcoin today. Hash locks, where someone has a pre-image to something and they could broadcast it. I think this is most applicable to people who provide Oracle services. It doesn't solve the Oracle problem, to be clear, but it allows people to be able to publish information in such a way that can interact with how Bitcoin funds move on chain. And then finally, time locks. And time locks have their own, context around them. To be brief, you can have a time lock based on what time of day it is, like a calendar date, or you can have it based on a block height. And then also you can have time locks based on an absolute date in the future, like July 1st or block height 1,000,000. Or you can do a relative time lock, which is like in 100 blocks, or let's say in 8 hours do this, right? So those are kind of like the ways you can apply time locks. And what Miniscript does ultimately, I view it as like bowling with bumpers, where you can never throw a gutter ball. If you put something through the Miniscript compiler and it's validated, you know for a fact that there is a way that you can spend that money, and you don't have to worry about drafting a custom Bitcoin script in such a way where you're going to permanently lock your money. So this, as a basic tool set, you add and operations or operations and thresholds, and you start opening up a wide open space of being able to do more advanced Bitcoin security features. And like one, just to think about, like something that doesn't even involve insurance, Albert, would be the idea that like, if we wanted to bet on if the Yankees are going to win or lose today, we can use Miniscript in such a way where I could, we put funds into an address, and there's maybe 2 ways to spend. There's my signature plus an oracle who says the Yankees won, and then I can take the money out, or it could be your signature plus the Yankees lost, right? And that Oracle can publish a hash based on what outcome happens. And this allows you to do, that's a very brief example, because I think sports betting is a great way to show like a binary outcome with someone's predicting, like someone is broadcasting like the state of a game. And if they broadcast that hash, you just take that hash and you throw it onto the Bitcoin chain with your signature, and you can actually move money around, right? So it's this idea of taking off-chain activity, and you can find a way to encode it in the way it operates with Bitcoin as that programmable money. And I think that's a wide open use case that's massively underexplored right now. We're not leveraging it currently. We're using, our signatures and time locks. But it's a really interesting design space to start thinking about more interesting ways of using Bitcoin on the application layer.
Can I understand this as an open invitation for someone to use Anchor Watch as an enabling technology for that sports betting?
Yeah, so we're not. So the answer is, if you have any questions around the Miniscript stuff specifically, I'm more than happy to help. We're laser focused on the insurance use case, but the underlying tool that we've built a lot of our tech on, which is Miniscript, could let you do this stuff with the sports betting example.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. Yeah, this is like another massive market now. Getting back to the insurance, this is really exciting, right? Because you're right. A lot of times, fund managers, they can't hold like too many assets in Bitcoin because it's not insured. And so, what you're saying is, when Anchor Watch is fully deployed, then, I mean, I think every fund would want to use Anchor Watch then, because because the way I see it is like I sort of think like I like to look at like macro terms and
Sure.
then come down to like the specifics. So if we're talking about like macro wise, if Ethereum went ahead, roughly the same amount of development as Bitcoin is now is like $30 to $50 per Ethereum. But now because it's got thousands, almost a 10,000, it's done 50x on this price, right? So it's not inconceivable for Bitcoin to have thousands of apps running on it. So if fund managers were able to hold part of their holdings in Bitcoin, I mean, we don't have to say 50x, but even if it went 10x or 20x, then that would be pretty amazing, right? That would probably even make the fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. Not to take a whole sidebar into a discussion of Bitcoin
Yeah.
versus ETH. I think Bitcoin, its native application use case is as money, right? Whereas ETH and the whole idea of Ether was like you have this as almost like gas, like a precious commodity that you would use to power these other contracts. And it was very explicit design trade-offs that were made in how ETH was built versus how Bitcoin was built to be able to do this stuff, right? Because like ETH lets you do arbitrary smart contracts, and Bitcoin has a very like they're Turing complete, and Bitcoin has a very restricted scripting language that only allows you to do certain things as explicitly not Turing complete. And as a funny, very interesting bridge, this was actually a quote from Andrew Polster, who's director of research at Blockstream and one of the inventors of Miniscript, was that prior to Miniscript, we in Bitcoin would often mock people in ETH because, oh man, look at all those crazy, arbitrary, complicated smart contracts and all of these hacks and everything. But the truth of the matter was, prior to Miniscript, there was no discrete, reasonable way that you could actually write Bitcoin smart contracts in a way where you didn't have a bug. So Miniscript actually finally answers the question of, if you're going to use Bitcoin for more advanced use cases, we had all of the upsides in the sense of not being a Turing complete language, but we didn't have the analyzable toolkit to be able to actually safely deploy these more advanced smart contracts. And Miniscript answers that question because now we can have this constrained set of using Bitcoin script in a way that we know is safe and verifiable as well as composable. But before that, we actually were left with the worst of both worlds. We had a non-Turing complete language as well as not having a way to discernibly analyze and reason about security. So that's just like one observation. And like I think, yeah.
What's the best environment to develop with Miniscript in?
Bitcoin Dev Kit is what I'm a huge champion of. So you can use if you're using Miniscript today, there's a C++ implementation of the compiler, and there's also a Rust implementation called Rust Miniscript. What I love about Bitcoin Dev Kit specifically is that it rolls Rust Bitcoin and Rust Miniscript as dependencies. So you get those kind of like with the toolkit. And with Bitcoin Dev Kit, you additionally can actually compile to other language bindings. So you can actually take a release version of Bitcoin Dev Kit, and you can compile it into Python, Kotlin, Swift, JavaScript. So you can get access to like the strong, reliable workhorse, which is the Rust implementation, but written in your own language with foreign language bindings, right? And I think that's just a really strong way where if you're building a mobile app or if you're building an application and maybe you're not a Rust developer, you can still get access to these powerful features, but you don't have to be coding natively in Rust.
Yeah. So yeah, big shout out to Steve there.
Yes, absolutely.
Behind the Bitcoin Dev Kit. And now that you mention it, yes, if we have a Bitcoin Olympics hackathon going right now, if you use a Bitcoin Dev Kit or if you build with Bitcoin Miniscript, yeah, there are $50,000 in prize pools for you to compete in. So that's a little tangent, but if you guys are, if you want to bring your startup idea to life, now's the chance to do it. So let's get back into Anchor Watch, Rob. For Anchor Watch, when you guys are doing this insurance, so what's the cost of this insurance? And like I put my Bitcoin, I lock it into your vault, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's how does that work? Like, why is that safer than just keeping it, like, say, in a cold storage, right?
Mm-hmm.
On Ledger or Tesla or
Sure.
whatever. And then what's the cost of that insurance? Let's get like some
so to answer those questions in order. So how is this different? So we're leveraging Miniscript for this idea of multi-institutional custody. in a way where instead of maybe in a 2 of 3 multi-sig where there's only 3 keys, what we're able to leverage with Miniscript is it's called thresholds of thresholds. So you can have multiple conditions that must be satisfied. For example, you as the customer could have your own 2 of 3. Us at AnchorWatch can have a 2 of 3, and we'll have like a third party that maybe is holding a 2 of 3. And the idea here is that for day-to-day spending, we actually we employ something that we'd like to call negative control. For the length of your insurance policy, AnchorWatch is not able to unilaterally, positively as a custodian move money around. But the negative control aspect is until we sign off on a transaction, it's actually not valid to the Bitcoin network. And this allows us to actually implement our own governance and standardization procedures for spending Bitcoin while you have an insurance policy with us. So this, a very quick example would be if someone, let's say they hacked your account, they hacked your hardware wallets, and they sign everything. They're like, hey, I want to send all of my Bitcoin to this address. We can easily, take a day or two, get on the phone with you, verify the details and the information of this transaction, and get to basically by moving slow, we get to, move fast in the sense of making sure your Bitcoin is safe, like slow is fast, because we want to make sure if someone's drafting and kicking off a transaction that we're not just going to be arbitrarily like, we're not a blind signer, right? In the sense that like, oh, here's your signature, click sign, ready to go, here, go run off with your money. We're very, since we are skin in the game aligned to holding risk, we want to make sure that the spends that are being executed are intended. Now, what's really interesting with Miniscript is that we're able to say, let's say your insurance policy expires September 1st next year. We could have it say, for example, on September 2nd next year, we at AnchorWatch, once we're no longer contractually liably holding risk for you, we're able to step back and no longer be a required signer, right? So this gets to be really interesting from a use case of we're never a positive control custodian. We can't move the money by any means by ourselves, but for the length of that policy, we're risk aligned with you. But then you don't have to worry about counterparty risk in the sense that if we were to cease operating, if we became malicious, refuse to sign your transactions, whatever the circumstances might be, once that time lock expires, it goes back to just being in your control, right? And that's something I think is just a really powerful idea of adding, as a general concept, adding time as part of your security. Right. Like if you're in a bank. Yeah, it should be. Right. Like if you were to like bank vaults have like programs where like, if you type in the lock, the door doesn't unlock for 30 minutes. Right. Because if it's in a malicious entry, they want to give time for police to arrive. We get to encode that exact same process within our own processes. And it's all enforced on layer 1 Bitcoin. So just to kind of answer, how is this different from a general cold storage insurance? Now, for the pricing, we haven't finalized reinsurance capacity conversations yet, but I'll say we're targeting for under 1%. Which I think in two senses is a strong pricing point, because for the existing insurance policies that are on the market, we're way cheaper. Like I've seen rates as 2 to 4% for insuring Bitcoin at an exchange or something, right? So we're way cheaper on that side. But then additionally, if you're paying custodian management fees, we believe that this is a much more risk aligned. This is a much better value aligned proposition for someone who wants to have exposure to Bitcoin, but they can't hold the keys themselves, like say a traditional custodian. Because if you're a traditional custodian, they may have little to no insurance coverage, or maybe they have one insurance policy covering all of the customers that have a per incident limit in such a way where if a loss were to happen, you're getting pennies back on the dollar. And our goal from the start was to actually offer a product that could provide protection to end users that would actually be covering risks and concerns that you would actually have as a user. And a lot of that became necessarily for us to build out our own tech stack, because no one was building on Miniscript really at scale when we first started like walking down this road. So it became a very obvious unlock that we had to kind of dog food and build out our own technology solution that kind of pairs with it. So it's very much a combination of the on-chain protocol encoding of Bitcoin script and the smart contract with an insurance like legal financial contract. And it's the intersections of those, which is what we're building to unlock.
Wow, that's amazing. That's much, obviously that's a huge value add above like a normal cold storage device, and 1%, that is like really, really competitive.
It's very interesting because when I have conversations with people, either soliciting feedback from potential pre-customers or talking to people within industry, pricing is like the most polarized conversation I have, and by that I mean people are saying 1%, you should be charging 2% plus, and then on the other side, people are like, if it's above 10 basis points, I'm not buying, right? So like it is so bipolar in the distribution of where we are with pricing. Ultimately, though, for it to be a good program, we want to be able to get a lot of people to come in to pool risk. right? We want to be able to get people that are actually offering solutions in a way where I like to call it hold keys, not risk, right? You can get exposure to the asset of Bitcoin, you pay an insurance premium, and then you know that you're going to be indemnified if something goes wrong up to that point. Actually, just this morning, we're seeing now Fortress Trust just got hacked and lost a bunch of money, and that's why Ripple bought them, right? And it's, it becomes a question of like, insurance as a concept way predates, fiat, like fiat dollars in economy. Originally was actually guilds of merchants that would be underwriting ships as they went and did explorations. That's where Lloyd's of London, it was Lloyd's coffee shop, was this idea where merchants would gather and they would, oh, you're going to go on an expedition. Who's the captain? What's the route you're taking? Right. You'd fill this all out. And it became this idea of like insured duties, where if you're going to take this insurance contract, you have to, and you have to follow certain practices to get that coverage. And that's where the role of insurance comes in as a mediator, to be able to ensure that best practices are being followed to be able to offer the coverage, right? Like you can't have, you can't, let's say, for example, take your 24 seed words and just like post them up as a tweet and then have a loss happen, right? Like, and then be like, oh, well, I'm covered. And it's like, well, no, you're supposed to be using, air gap computers and hardware wallets, right? Like, but this is the idea though of being able to actually act as a governing body to ensure better practices within the industry, and financially aligning it with an insurance policy is the way a healthy, normal free market would mediate risk.
Wow, that is very amazing. So, I'm curious, where do you think like when Anchor Watch becomes fully mature, can you paint a picture of what that looks like? And then in order for that to happen, who should reach out to you to partner with you guys or be your customers?
Yeah. So the question on like, as Anchor Watch matures, the role I see is hopefully bringing insurance to custodial solutions on the market. And that's why we initially, our focus was on retail, and then we pivoted to commercial, and just realizing that a lot of Bitcoin's held at commercial entities today, and, trying to bring about those better practices, right, with better risk-aligned outcomes. So we're very focused on our initial version of the product, which is going to be on cold storage insurance. A really big unlock for this recently has been all of the hardware wallets adding support to Miniscript in a way where end users can actually have reasonable understandings of how they're securing their own private key material. I think we're coming up now on 6 devices that are supporting it, and that's all just going to be really massive for getting it to end adoption. So I see us adding other products down the line, whether that's lightning insurance, whether that's hot wallet insurance, right? Like different wrappers of the product, but understanding that risk is ever present, and wherever there's a sizable market demand of a quantifiable risk, stepping in to hopefully be able to, assuage concerns and be able to, reduce friction in economic transactions in general, right? I view it as something that this is core financial infrastructure for Bitcoin as it continues to grow as an economy. That you're gonna, you have fundamentally, it's called the principal agent problem, right? You have someone who is an investor, capital holder, whoever they are, they're the principal, and then they delegate to an agent, in this sense a custodian, to manage that for them. And you're always going to have a tension in that principal agent problem and making sure that the agent is actually sticking up for their fiduciary responsibilities to the principal, the actual investor. And I see this over time, like as Anchor Watch matures, is that insurance infiltrates the market and becomes a way to actually govern better practices and ultimately help protect consumers and bring better market confidence as new entrants come in.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Something caught my ear in there, and you're talking about the core financial infrastructure. I mean, when you say that, I sort of visualize something, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost like Anchor Watch is like a foundational element for a lot of different insurance or financial products to be built on top of it. How would you respond to that?
I would agree that insurance is foundational to just any market in general. Cars, homes, high-end property. Insurance is also typically for like, it's used as a wealth preservation tool, right? The idea that maybe if like just in general, the idea of like, I want to take some amount of my wealth and I want to pay to protect that in the event something goes wrong, I still can have my wealth, is something that's pretty just standard, just, in human behavior in general, being risk adverse, right? So for the like as foundational like elements, I 100% agree that as long as you continue to have this principal agent problem where other people are going to be holding private key material for you, and that could be adversely impacted in such a way where you no longer have the money, you're going to want to have some sort of risk transference, because anything short of an insurance policy isn't fully stepping up to like the customer's desire, right? The idea is I'm giving you my Bitcoin to hold in escrow because I want to make sure it's held safely. And insurance is the other end of that equation for, okay, what if something goes wrong, right? And that's why I kind of view in general, like, we're in conversations with, wallet providers, custodians, businesses that are operating today in Bitcoin, anyone where you have this principal agent problem appear. I just think insurance is just the natural free market evolution of how do you try and mediate these problems. So we're really excited to be kind of building this core foundational infrastructure. And I think it's going to be a really big unlock for incremental, like new dollars to come into the Bitcoin economy.
Yeah, super. That's awesome. So if if you want to inspire some builders here on some, let's say you magically had all this time, right? And Anchor Watch is already like fully operational. Which are the first like 3 projects you build on top of Anchor Watch?
The first 3 projects, probably hot wallet insurance. I would probably also start looking more aggressively into building with Taproot specifically. We're starting with pay to witness script hash, and not to get too bogged down in the weeds, but Taproot just enables for more robust and private ways that you can execute these smart contracts where you don't have to reveal all of the contract information. That'd be a really great unlock. The hot wallet insurance, which I mentioned because there are people who want to have higher frequency touch points with their Bitcoin. And then on top of that, probably Lightning insurance, because Lightning, which kind of ties into the hot wallet insurance insofar as those funds have to be sitting live internet connected to a node. So I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities there. And with all of this, it's all just trying to find additional ways that Bitcoin's being used today where there's risk present. Pretty strongly, I think the data would back us up and strongly would say that layer 1 holding a Bitcoin store of value is that largest market. And as we build traction and product market fit, we can start kind of expanding out to other opportunities and use cases. And I think a lot of that along the way also comes from listening to customers and potential customers, like getting product feedback and talking to people who are having pain points and understanding where's that intersection of people who have a lot of a pain point with something that has enough scale to be able to monetize that justifies investing the time and money putting into building solutions around it. So I'm very open-minded into what the future looks like, because my hands are so full right now standing up our insurance carrier, which I didn't actually mention, but we're standing up a Bermuda carrier that can actually do Bitcoin denominated insurance as well. So that's a whole different way of like doing finance rather than being US dollar denominated. My plate's so full for the next year that I have ideas of what I want to work on, but I want to try to be really focused on unlocking these initial use cases, and then I can start revisiting my dream roadmap and starting building on top of that.
Super. I love it. So we have about 22 minutes here left. So Rob, how do you feel about us opening up the floor to some questions?
Would love to.
Wonderful. So this is an open invitation, guys. Don't be shy. Ask some questions. Just raise your hand. We'll bring you up as a speaker. Yeah. So let me ask you a question while people are thinking about the question they want to ask here. What do you think are the most important insurance types that need to be developed first in order for the Bitcoin economy to grow to the next level?
Yeah, so we're starting with the cold storage, which is most akin to like a property specie coverage, where like if you can get an insurance policy that insures gold in a vault, you want to be able to actually like have similar levels of pricing and assurance for securing that Bitcoin. And then, like I said before, the next layer would be hot wallet insurance, which is much more akin to cyber insurance because you have internet connected keys. So if someone wants to spend their money, you need to be able to make sure that you're returning that signature within, let's say, an hour, right? Or maybe 10 minutes, right? Which is a different use case than like kind of that cold storage process. And I think that core layer 1 use case, whether it's hot wallet or cold wallet, are those biggest pieces. mentioned before the Lightning stuff, which I think is really interesting, and seeing as Lightning continues to develop, how to develop risk products around that. Ultimately, it's wherever Bitcoin is being used and there's a way you can quantify a risk to understand what that looks like, and making sure there's just a large enough addressable market around it.
Interesting, interesting. And on that note, what types of investors should be reaching out to you? You know, like that have like natural synergies with you guys. Like what's the profile there?
Investors and people who are looking to use the product, or people looking to invest in us, or
Well, actually both. Both are important, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, open call for anyone who's just interested in investing in us. You can reach out to me at rob@anchorwatch.com. We are very open-minded, would happy to see where a conversation goes. You know, we're in contacts with traditional venture capital firms, insurance investor, people with an insurance background are always a plus. You know, the Bitcoin VCs as well. So we're in a lot of talks and communication currently. But I would say for people who are looking to use the product, anyone, family office, multifamily office, we've had a lot of interest from miners as well as mining pools, people who are just natively touching Bitcoin all of the time and they want to have exposure to it on the Bitcoin businesses side. And then additionally, just like I said before, people who are looking to get investment exposure to Bitcoin and probably may have been restricted from being able to get exposure to Bitcoin prior to this point, using if insurance is a big unlock for being able to kind of assuage your investment committee or your managing partners, definitely reach out. We'd love to talk to you.
Super. Thanks for sharing that. And then for like the builders, I guess you've already shared a lot of awesome ideas. So if any builders out there resonate with any of those ideas, come find Rob.
Yeah. I'm always happy to talk about leveraging Miniscript as a tool set. I've been helping a lot of people who are building wallets in the space. People are working on new projects just to kind of bounce off ideas. So don't hesitate to reach out. I'm always happy to give a couple pointers and help you get in the right direction if you're looking to build this more advanced smart contracting on Bitcoin.
Yeah, and by the way, guys, if you build Miniscript, that's one of the 15 technologies that is supported by Bitcoin Olympics and Bitcoin Startup Lab. And if you apply now to Bitcoin Olympics, you are eligible to compete in $50,000 in prizes. So it's a little added incentive for you, like the cherry on top. Don't do it for the money, do it for the love of the building something valuable. But it's always nice to have the cherry on top. All right. So looks like Rob, we have a pretty shy audience here. I wonder, what's going on here. We had a pretty shy audience like before too, but sometimes we just have a shy audience.
Yeah.
I see some familiar faces here. They're very loyal listeners here, but sometimes they don't always come up to ask questions. Mm-hmm. So if there are no extra questions, what are some of the can you share maybe we could wrap it up with some encouraging words for builders, because there's this how do I say, there's a tectonic shift coming. There's a tectonic shift coming, and I don't think it's really Bitcoin against Ethereum. I think there's definitely room for both to grow in the ecosystem, but I think it's become clear that now that Bitcoin is more and more programmable, there are some things that could be re-envisioned bigger and actually better on Bitcoin, right? What would you say to people sort of on the fence? They're Ethereum has a bunch of users right now. Bitcoin has not many users or not many active users. Most people are hodlers, right? What do you have to say to that to encourage people to come to the Bitcoin side and start building?
I mean, I view Bitcoin as a cathedral. In that cathedrals in medieval times, I think Nick Carter originally wrote the piece about this, that they would take hundreds of years to build. And if you want to work on a very hard problem that can give you a lot of meaning, I think Bitcoin is that kind of project. And there is a beauty in the limitations of how Bitcoin operates, and operating within a constrained space that requires more creative problem solving. It requires more critical thinking and try to maximize trade-offs and execution and ways of kind of executing an idea. And I think that's ultimately incredibly rewarding. And then really you just to look at it from a sense of building what really scratches your itch and gives you a passion, because it's not easy to be a founder. I've been doing it now for coming up on 18 months. And what continually drives me forward is a strong passion and excitement about the problem I'm trying to solve. And you're going to have down days. And I think what's most important is to kind of have that large overarching vision seared into you in a way that a day where maybe someone else would give up and fold it in, you're going to have the drive to keep on pushing forward. And I think that becomes very individual dependent on what are problems that give you meaning and keep you excited and engaged. But that would be my advice for people that are looking to build in Bitcoin, is that while I do not think Bitcoin is preordained to automatically win and succeed, I think the hard work of people that are adding to Bitcoin's infrastructure are playing a great role in helping, Bitcoin's adoption and helping Bitcoin continue to grow and succeed. And it's a noble mission, because ultimately, going back to the start of our conversation, I got into Bitcoin. A lot of the appeals for understanding money, the unethical creation of money, and understanding that there is a more fair way to, execute a monetary system. For me, that's kind of one of these core drivers that does continue to give me meaning. And it's something that I like to hope and think that I'm doing a very small part in that larger cathedral by laying one brick down, right? And I think Bitcoin is so early in its global adoption that my only regret is not getting full-time engaged with Bitcoin sooner, because I was in Bitcoin since 2013, and I probably had opportunities in 2015 and 2016 to do full-time work. And that would have just been even further compounding my own personal growth and journey in Bitcoin and my own skill set. So I would say that, for anyone who's thinking about building out there, you should take the swing and take a bet on yourself, because that's ultimately what it is to be a founder. You have to take that bet on yourself to be able to execute something that no one else has done before. And that's something that once you kind of take the leap, for me personally, at least I can say that it's been incredibly rewarding. I've learned more about myself. I've grown to be a better person. And it's something that I really think Bitcoin is a mission worth trying to build on top of.
Oh yeah, no, I said we completely resonate on that one. It really is the highest potential for creating an alternative financial ecosystem. Insurance being one of the pillars for that. And
Sure,
at the Bitcoin Startup Lab, we're definitely a staunch supporter to enable people to build that entire ecosystem. And like you said, Bitcoin winning or being future proof, that's not a given. We have to fight for it. Like anything worthwhile is not going to be an easy path. Anything worthwhile is not going to be an easy path, and we have to fight for it. So with we as we accumulate more and more friends, this ecosystem has more and more support for people coming in and building with Bitcoin, right? And thank you again for sharing how to do Miniscript with our core.
absolutely.
And again, we're supporting Miniscript. Anchor Watch is something that is enabled through Miniscript also, right? And we're really looking forward to more great news for Anchor Watch. So with that said, guys, check out Anchor Watch if be you investor or user. This is something that you guys definitely have to take a look at. It's going to become one of the pillars of our Bitcoin financial alternate ecosystem, right, to the centralized powers that be. And Anchor Watch is not just something that you could use; you could also build with it, right? You could is an enabler for many other things, more advanced features and insurance. So keep an eye out for what Rob and Becca are doing at Anchor Watch. And thanks for joining, everyone. And again, if you guys have an idea and you want to do have fun, join the Bitcoin Olympics and meet like-minded people. It's going to be really cool. The last Bitcoin Olympics, people were just raving, and we only had 5 technologies. This time we have 15 technologies that you could choose from or mix and match, right? And if you feel like, hey, I want to take the startup plunge, go to Bitcoin Startup Lab. We help you turn your idea into an investment-worthy startup. Okay, so go ahead and reach out to us, reach out to Rob. We're here to enable people to help build the Bitcoin economy together. So with that said, thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Rob, for coming on, and congratulations for making it into the top 30 for Bitcoin innovators of 2023.
Thanks, Albert.